You know, there's a term in halakha, two terms that are similar. Tana, the Messiah. Tana, an earlier source that helps me out. Sometimes you find something you really believe in, and you don't have a proof exactly in the text that what you're saying is correct. And randomly you'll find the rabbis that say, oh, I found an earlier source that he came to help me out. Sometimes they use the word chaver, it's a colleague of mine. He says something similar, he came to help me out. For years I've been towing a certain line in Jewish philosophy, and I knew that what I was saying was true. I just didn't know that anyone else had actually verbalized it in the same fashion. And as soon as I was convinced that I was correct, a book came to my hands from Israel, written by a great, great rabbi. And in there, everything that I thought was true, he said is incorrect.
Incorrect?
Incorrect. And I was a little broken, I'm not going to lie to you. I got it when I was in May in Israel. I brought it back, I've been learning it. And it was difficult to see. Maybe I'm incorrect. But I still believed so much that I was right, but you can't. If I see a proof that goes against what I'm saying, and I don't have a proof to back up exactly what I'm saying, then at a certain point you have to say you're incorrect. And that was all fine and dandy until this week's parasha. When I was sitting down to prepare parasha this week, our parents didn't give class this week. He's in Bulgaria, he's doing a bedin for conversions in Bulgaria, so he wasn't able to record a class and send it over to me. I opened up the books of Rabbi David Halevy. Rabbi David Halevy was an interesting philosopher. He was one of the oldest Sephardic rabbis in Israel at the time of the founding of the state of Israel. He's a colleague of Chacham Ovadia Yosef, a little bit older, and was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv Yafo. He was supposed to be the chief rabbi of Israel, but with all the politics that had to go into that, they made sure that he wasn't going to be the chief rabbi of Israel. He was a student of Rabbi Uziel, and then a student of Rabbi Kook. And therefore he managed to combine both a very Sephardic worldview and a very Ashkenazi worldview, a rational worldview with a Kabbalistic worldview, and put them together into one personality. A very special, you consider the temple Dajou? Yeah. He managed to do things that nobody else did. His philosophy upset many people. He believed, I gave you a class from his teachings on Shavuot night, the separation of church and state. Not everyone liked his moderate stance on Judaism. And they made it their mission that as soon as he died, his books were going to die with him. And most of his books that I own are books that I found from libraries that went out of business, or from old bookstores that didn't know what the book was and they just had it floating around. They just reprinted a brand new edition of his books on halakha. So some of his works are having a comeback. I found the Tana de Messiah. I found a earlier source that says that what I was saying is correct. So now it's no longer what I'm saying, now it's what he said. I want to walk you through something very beautiful. In this week's parasha it says, let me actually use the Chumash, please, if that's okay. On page 1004. שמור ושמעת את כל הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך. Safeguard and listen to all these words that I am mitzaveka, that I am commanding you. למען ייטב לך, so that it should be good for you, ולבניך אחריך עד עולם, to you and your children until the end of time. כי תעשה הטוב והישר בעיני אדוני אלוהיך. You should do what is tov. What is tov?
Good.
Good. Vayashar. What is yashar?
Straightforward.
Straightforward. Just could just be a righteous. Straightforward is the closest. What do they translate that to be?
Pathways of the just.
The just. Straightforward is correct, but straightforward might sound like something else. And just. Let's use the word just. You should do what is good and just in the eyes of Hashem your God. Fine. There's a pasuk earlier that we had, I believe it's in Parashat Re'eh, where the Torah tells us something similar. On page 976. ועשית הישר והטוב בעיני אדוני. You should do what is straightforward and good in the eyes of Hashem. למען ייטב לך, so that it should be good for you. ובאת, and you should come, וירשת את הארץ הטובה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיך, so you can come and inherit the land which Hashem has given your fathers. In this pasuk, the order is switched around. ועשית הישר והטוב. You should first do what is just, and then do what is good. When you find two psukim that are saying the same thing, and they're saying them in a different order, in the same book, it says darsheni. You must understand that the Torah is trying to tell you something. And what the Torah is trying to tell you something is up to interpretation, obviously. We have to first see what is Yashar, what is Tov. This book that we're in the Chumash, the book of Dvarim, is known first off as Sefer Devarim. That's the most common name that it's called by. Devarim is the book of Torah. This is what we're in. The second name this book has, anyone know what else Sefer Devarim is called?
Hebrew?
In Hebrew? Mishneh Torah. Very good. It's called the Mishneh Torah, the review of the Torah. It's like a summary of everything that was said in the first 4 books. There's a third name for this book. It's called Sefer HaYashar, the book of the straightforward, the just.
What does Deuteronomy mean? It's a Greek word?
Greek or Latin. I don't know. Anyone know Deuteronomy? I don't even know. Like when they tell me Leviticus, I don't know what they're talking about. I never know which book they're talking about. The book of Dvarim has 3 names, 2 of which people use, the third one people don't use. Then why don't people call this book Sefer HaYashar, the book of the just? But when you start to dig into it a little bit deeper, you find out that it's because not everyone agrees that the book of Dvarim is called the book of the Yashar, of the book of the straight. It says in the book of Yehoshua, וידום השמש וירח עמד עד יקום גוי אויביו, הלא היה כתובה על ספר, הלא היא כתובה על ספר הישר. It's written in the book of Hayashar. Again, you find also in Shmuel, when David is speaking about Shaul and Yonatan, he says, Halo hi ktuva al Sefer HaYashar. It's written in the book of Hayashar, of the just. The simple understanding of what is the book of Hayashar is coming by name of the rabbi called the Ralbag. Have you heard of the Ralbag before? There was Nachmanides, the Ramban. There was the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. And there was the Ralbag. Rabbeinu Levi ben Gershon. Ralbag. R-A-L-B-A-G.
Oh, yeah.
The Ralbag is perhaps the only that I can think of. The only Ashkenazi Rishon who had an influence on the non-Jewish philosophical world. Maimonides, Nachmanides, you'll see these names thrown around a lot in secular literature. Right. They quote them a lot. The Goyim, the Christians, by the Ashkenazim, they don't quote Rashi, they don't quote Tosfot, but the Ralbag, he sticks out as a very prominent philosopher, even in the non-Jewish world. The Ralbag's commentary here tells us, what does it mean Sefer HaYashar? He said it must mean that there was a book that was called Sefer HaYashar, the book of the just, and it was lost over time. We don't have it anymore. Pshat is there was a separate book from the Torah that was called Sefer HaYashar. And many Acharonim follow his path. Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel, who wrote an Aramaic translation of the Torah, of the Tanakh, he says, Gersonides, that's what they call him, very good. That's very good. He writes, what does it mean? It's written in the book HaYashar. Ha-hik teva al sifra deoraita. It's written in the book called the Torah. Meaning, according to Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel, the Sefer HaYashar, what is the book of the just? It's the whole Torah. Anything that's part of the Torah is called the book of the just. The Radak, Rabbi David, Kimchi, he took upon himself this. He follows the opinion of Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel. Every time it says Sefer HaYashar, it means the books, the 5 books of Moshe. But the rabbis in the Gemara have a completely different understanding. What is the book? Sefer HaYashar. There's an argument. The argument is, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, זה ספר אברהם, יצחק ויעקב שנקראו ישרים. This is the book of Bereshit that talks about Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who are called Yesharim. Who calls them Yesharim? Who calls them just people? Do you remember?
Moses.
Bilam is about to die. And he says, May I die, tamut nafshi mot Yesharim. May I die a death of the straightforward, of the just. Who is that? Mot Yesharim. I think the Baal HaTurim there, if I remember, he says Yesharim comes out to Gematria, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. He's saying, I wish to die with the same name as Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. He renounces his evil ways at the end of his life. And the Pshat is, among all the commentaries of the Chumash, The book of Bereshit is called Sefer HaYashar, the book of the just. Rabbi Elazar comes in and says, Zeh Sefer Mishneh Torah. This is the book of Dvarim. Why the book of Dvarim? V'lama nikra Sefer HaYashar. Why is this book called the book of the straight, the just? Shekatuv bo v'asita hayashar v'atov b'nei Adonai. Because in this book it says you should do what is good and what is just in the eyes of Hashem.
It doesn't say so in Shmot.
No, very good. So come in the Mefarshim here, and they say, listen, with all due respect, there are other books that have the word Hayashar inside of it. And Rashi in there, and the Gemara says that Rabbi Elazar, this whole opinion is fabricated, it's not part of the original text, and he takes it out. But Rav Chaim David Halevi says it's not true. If you look in the end of Gemara Yerushalmi, there's in the first chapter of Sotah in Gemara Yerushalmi, the Gemara says Sefer Devarim is Sefer Hayashar. This is the book Hayashar. But to answer my first question, why don't people call this book the book Hayashar? Probably because most opinions don't believe that that is the name of this book. But after I told you all this, I believe it must be called Sefer Hayashar because of those two verses I started off with. V'asita hayashar v'hatov, you should do what is just and what is good. V'asita hatov v'hayashar, you must do what is good and what is just. Both of these verses are come to tell us something. And in order to understand what I wish to say, we have to talk about what is good and what is just. Can you be both good and just? Let's define terms. What does it mean to be just?
It means that you don't try to look good or be politically correct. You act in a way that is according to what you've learned to be the just correct.
Correct. So in the fashion of the Torah, it would mean to live according to the letter of the law and not give in to any pressures, not try to do what is politically correct, what is perceived as good, rather to do exactly what it is that Hashem wants me to do. Yashar. A person who's yashar, who's straight, very often is not a person who is good. Not that he's bad, but people would perceive them as a stickler for rules, as very rigid and very, why are you so hard all the time? Why are you so tough? Let loose a little bit, be nice, smile a little bit. Yashar doesn't go together with the word tov. Tov, what is tov? Tov is somebody who's very good. They always want to make sure that things look good to other people. They want to make sure that things are done in a way that is politically correct. To make sure that things are done in a way, it doesn't mean, God forbid, that they're not just. But these two personalities, these two character traits of Yashar and Tov, are seemingly contradictory. And we find this case to be true in the Gemara. There's a story in the Gemara. There's a rabbi called Rabbi Bar Chana. Rabbi Bar Chana was a rabbi we found in Masechet Bava Metzia. He hired workers to work for him. And while they were carrying his barrels of wine, that's what he hired them to do, they dropped them and they broke. And all the wine spilled out. You have to understand, wine, a barrel of wine is worth a lot of money. It's like if you would hire somebody to move your jewelry from one side of the house to another side of the house. It's heavy for you to carry because you have so much gold and silver in your home. And they somehow break them, shatter everything to pieces, your diamonds falling out of the window, whatever happened over there. Who's responsible for this? The movers. It's the movers' responsibility. So what did he do? He said, pay me for the barrels of wine. And they said, we're sorry, we don't have any money. So what did he do to them? He took their clothing. He took their robes, their hats, whatever they had, he took from them. And he said, when you want, come pay me the rest. So they called him the Bedin. And Rav, who was presiding over the Bedin, said, give them back their clothing. He said, but that's halakha. Halakha is they damaged me. I have to give them back their clothing. Rav said, yes. It says, Leman telech bederech tovim. You should always go in a good foot, in a good road, in a good way. They broke your things, but you can't take away somebody's clothing. Yeah, according to halakha, you can. But according to being a good person, you can't take away someone's clothing.
And so you should return the keepsake of a cloak by morning. Do not keep a worker's...
This is by a person who owes you money.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. We don't have any reason to believe that the nighttime or the daytime have passed. It's all in the same hour that the story is happening. They then tell Rav, but it's not just that. We're poor. We worked hard. We don't have anything to drink. We don't have anything to eat. He has to pay us for our work. And Rav says, okay, so you must pay them for their work. Rabbi Bachan said, I don't understand. Halakha is that they owe me money. Why do I have to pay them for their work? Is that the deen? He says, Ken. It says, V'orchot tzadikim tishmo. You must follow in the pathway of the righteous. And even though they damage you, and even though they hurt you, you must give them to eat and drink. And here you see the difference between Yashar and Tov. Rabbi Yonatan is telling you, I'm a Yashar. I didn't do anything wrong. He took away their objects. It wasn't wrong. They owe him money. He didn't want to pay them. Rightfully so. You hire someone to move your things, they break your piano. I'm going to also pay you because you broke my piano? You're lucky I'm not suing you in court.
The thing is that to be told, it can't just be an emotional thing, because it can be like excessive chesed. There has to be a logic behind it.
Oh wait, you're getting onto something very important. According to Rav though, Rav says you have to be the better person. You have to do what is tov. And even though it means you're not following the letter of the law, that is tov. But there's a danger here. There's a danger. When I try to do something that is tov, essentially I'm violating Hashem's Torah. What can be good? I mean, you can do more damage sometimes by following these emotions and always doing what is good. If the Torah says they owe you money, there must be a reason why Hashem programmed into the order of law that they owe you money. What kind of goodness can come out from constantly changing around what the Torah says because you perceive it as not being good?
Don't you have to take it a situation at a time, though?
Very, okay, this is true. This is true. The reason why we don't have rules, and you'll find it's much harder to define what is tov than it is to define what is yashar. Yashar is pretty much, you can put it in a box. Sticks to the letter of the law. Tov, there's no good equation. You can plug it in. When do you follow tov? When do you follow yashar? All I can tell you from learning these cases is sometimes a person has to be tov. Sometimes a person has to be yashar. Oh, very good. And that is why the Torah comes to tell you, V'asita yashar v'atov, v'asita tov v'yashar. Sometimes you have to be yashar. Sometimes you have to be tov. What makes me decide to go like this or go like that? It must be you are in that situation, and you say, I feel that in this situation, tov is the way I have to go. In this situation, yashar is the way I have to go. I can't give you a formula that will tell you in which situation do I do something else.
Well, there isn't. One has to be flexible. One shouldn't just be locked into one way of seeing things.
Correct.
Because sometimes yashar would be correct, and sometimes tov would be correct.
Correct. If you look in the Sifri,
the question is, how do you know when? How do you develop your judgment?
Yes, this is exactly where we're going. There's a Sifri. Sifri is on this week's Parashat. The Sifri in section 79 says, Ki ta'aseh hatov hayashar. What does Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva says, it says hatov b'nei Shamayim. You must do what is good to Hashem. V'hayashar b'nei bnei Adam. When you're dealing with Hashem, you always go out of your way to do also what is good, not just what you have to do. When you're dealing with other people, you stick to the letter of the law. This is very funny because this is Rabbi Akiva. This is V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. This is the man who is all about doing to other people what you want to do to yourself. Okay, this is Rabbi Akiva. But let's just leave his opinion there. The Rabbi Ishmael steps in and he says, no. Hayashar b'nei Shamayim. With Hashem, stick to the letter of the law. He's okay with doing just whatever he told you to do.
You're talking about between Adam
and Hashem.
Not Adam and Adam.
Very good. You stick to the letter of the law. Between you and other people, though, you must go out of your way, says Rabbi Ishmael, to do also what is good.
But even that would be situational, because there are some people who say, he's easy. We'll take advantage of him. We will do this, and then won't ask for us to pay him back. You get a reputation of that, and then people take advantage, and then you lose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We're hoping not to talk about someone who's a manipulative person. We're talking about a person who wants to follow the will of Hashem. Rabbi Akiva is telling you, with Hashem, go above and beyond the letter of the law. With people, stick to the letter of the law. And Rabbi Ishmael is saying, with Hashem, stick to the letter of the law, and with people, go above and beyond the letter of the law. And here, the truth is each one is learning from a different verse. It says, V'asita hayashar v'hatov b'nei Adonai. You must do what is just and what is good in the eyes of Hashem. Which one is close to in the eyes of Hashem? Tov. So this is whose opinion? Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, it says you must do what is straight, and in the eyes of Hashem you must do what is good. That's how he's learning out this pasuk. And therefore with Hashem you have to do what is good. Rabbi Ishmael says, no, but there's another verse. The other verse says, V'asita hatov v'hayashar. With Hashem you stick to the letter of the law, and with other people you do what is good. This is the origin of their argument. They're fighting here about how to interpret two different verses inside of the Torah.
It seems to be a situation that the law of the halacha is like the blueprint, but a Jew must learn how to act in the moment, in the situation, and know whether chesed or gemura is noted. Like what happened with Pinchas, right?
He went on his own. He did something that wasn't necessarily warranted, but in that case, he turned out to be correct.
And it was actually
Is it
seen
what
to
you're-
be, in the eyes of Hashem, an act of chesed.
Oh, so what you're saying is good. What Zeb is saying is also what I said on Shavuot, if you remember. That Rabbi Yonatan Halevy was making an argument that even though we have halachot, the halachot in the Torah were given to us in a very vague fashion when they come to running the government. The reason is that even though there is an order according to halacha, it is up to the king, it is up to the dayan, it is up to the Sanhedrin, in every generation to re-examine and to say, this generation, we might have to tweak something. That's not that Hashem made it in a way so they could do that without violating the Torah. You must know how to be flexible with these areas. This drags me though to a different place. And this place is a story in the Gemara Bava Metzia. The Gemara Bava Metzia, Barry, did you learn Bava Metzia? Not okay. So Bava Metzia has an interesting story inside of it. This story says, Barry finished a lot of shas, that's why I asked him questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. In Bava Metzia,
Of course.
Rabbi Mitzvah.
in Bava Metzia it says, two were walking along the road. Shnayim hayu malchim baderech. They're traveling in the desert. Two people. And one of them had, let's give two names. Choose two names for me.
Reuven and Shimon.
Reuven and Shimon. Reuven has with him a jug of water, a canteen with water, and Shimon doesn't have. Both of them reach a place where they're about to die from thirst. If they have a situation, if Reuven drinks his water, Shimon will for sure die, but Reuven will make it to the next village. If they split the water, both of them will die, and neither of them will make it to the next village. The question is, what do you do? Do you let your friend die, or do you die with your friend?
Rabbi Akiva says
What does Rabbi Akiva say?
that the one who has the water has to drink it.
Listen, very good. She's right. This is very important.
No coin toss, huh?
Darash ben Ptorah. Ben Ptorah, he learned out from the verses the following. Mutav, it's good, it's better. Shishtu shnehem v'yamutu, that both of them should drink and die. V'al yireh echad mehem b'mitato shel chavaro. And nobody should see the other one. Nobody should kill the other one. It's better for both of them to drink and die, and to at least save those next few minutes, than for one of them to drink and let his friend die. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came, v'limed, and he taught them. It says in the Torah, v'chai achicha imach, your brother must live with you, meaning your life is important. Your brother's life is just as important as yours. He learns that pasuk to say that your life then must be first. And therefore, chayecha kodmim lechayecha v'cha, your life comes before his, and even though this is a very sad story, it's better for at least one of you to survive, and who survives? The one who owns the water. Now if you understand, where is Rabbi Akiva coming from? Rabbi Akiva is coming from a place where he says, Tov, doing above the letter of the law,
It's not right.
only belongs to Hashem, between you and Hashem. But between you and other people, what do?
Yashar.
You follow Yashar, the letter of the... What is Yashar? Yashar is that not both people should die. Both people shouldn't die according to the what is Yashar. According to Tov, it's better. Says Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, the words here are beautiful. Ben Ptorah, what is he? He doesn't say the halacha is that both of them should drink. He doesn't say that's the halacha. Rather, he says mutav, it's better. If you would ask me, it's better. It's better. It's tov. What is tov? It's tov for a person that both of them should die, and not one of them should go on to the next town alone.
But you see that no one's recommending that the friend get the water instead of the person who
Well,
owns
that would just be the same story in the reverse.
But it's...
Well, of course, I can't give up on my own life entirely for somebody else.
Right, exactly.
I mean-
There's no martyrdom idea.
Oh, this is true.
Like the Christian.
And in general, halacha is when you save somebody else, you save them unless you're going to die while saving them. In which case, you do not have an obligation to
I mean,
save
it's
them.
your women and if it's your wife and children, it's a little different, I guess.
Well, this is an old halachic discussion. Look, how could you be a soldier in war? If you know that by going to war, you're going to save somebody, but you might die. It's a real halachic question how a soldier is allowed to go to war. And Poskim talk a lot about all these scenarios. In this situation, Rabbi Ben Ptorah is telling you, do what is tov. So Rabbi Akiva is telling you, limed. I'm telling you the law. The law is, you don't have to do it. Rabbi Ben Ptorah is telling us, how could you let your friend die? How could you do such a thing? Better both of you should die. How could you live with this? Rabbi Akiva is saying, I can tell you how I'm living with this. because I must do what is straight in front of Hashem, and not what is good to this person. Now this question must have bothered a lot of people, and that's why Rabbi Akiva came and gave a second opinion. Because clearly this is a matter of much debate, and you should know that the poskim who've debated the story since Rabbi Akiva's time, not everyone is in agreement that Rabbi Akiva is right, and not everyone is in agreement that Ben Torah is right. Until today, this very day, there's still a fight in the Beit Midrash about who's correct.
So there is no halachic ruling?
Correct. And the reason for this is because I, as a human being, can never know if what I'm doing is straight or what I'm doing is good. These are very subjective things.
Yeah,
Sometimes what I think is good is the worst thing I can do in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sometimes, like Zev said, what looks like a barbaric act of zealotry turns out to be the greatest chesed in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in essence, the only one who could really know what is truly good and yashar at the same time is only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He has a different perspective. And we are stuck in this story. And in this story, it's either our logic or our emotions that are going to win over us. But it's very hard to say that both of them are going to unite and be able to accomplish both Tov and Yashar.
Of course, the situation in the desert is, with the water, is hypothetical, because could a person, especially under duress, know that, well, the water won't make it.
For both of us.
There's so many liters. Oh, maybe today it's cooler or hotter, and so many liters will get you the city or not get you, say there is or not. You're still having to make an educated guess.
Okay, so correct. These cases of Chazal are not meant to be literal scenarios. Rather, because really, how could you know that this water will do for me, what it won't do for him, and if we both drink, it's not enough? But it's trying to bring out a point, and the point here is, according to Rabbi Akiva, that my life is more valuable than someone else's in this situation. According to Ben Torah, it says, what's the point of life if your life is more valuable than someone else's? And there's a Yesodi argument here. And this argument goes back to the argument of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel about, do you first do what is just, or do you first do what is good? There are some places, and there's a reason I'm saying all this, because I told you I had a point at the beginning, and this is not the point.
You were talking about
There are some,
prisons.
yes, there are some places where Chazal tell us that you can accomplish both as a human being. You can accomplish both what is good and what is just. And Chazal say, "V'asita yashar v'atov, zo pshara lifnim mishurat adin." If two parties are willing to compromise, there are times where a certain compromise can bring about both what is good and what is just. For example, there's a law that says if somebody, let's say I owe somebody money and I wasn't able to pay, and Beit Din says this collateral, this card that you put down, you see this with, what do they call those guys? The bail bonds. What do they call it? The guys who bail people out of prison. Give me your car so that I'll know that if you don't come back, I'm going to keep this car. What happens if after 10 years you got back your $12,000? Can you come to the guy and say, I want my car back? Or he says, listen, you paid me what it's worth.
I don't think you sign agreements within a certain amount of time.
So according to Chazal, no matter how long has passed, a person who lost one of his items can always redeem it with money if he can bring the money. If he can bring you money, even after 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, he can always come back and take what is his.
That car's going to be in good shape after 2 years.
This is not a halakha. I mean, this is not what halakha is. Halakha says, you lost. Big deal, that's life. You signed the contract. But Chazal made a rule that says, it's a compromise. He's going to get his money back, and you're going to get your car back. There's another halakha. If I have this house here, and my next door neighbor is selling his house, according to halakha, if I put a bid on the house, and some random guy from Claremont puts a bid on the house, who should win that bid?
You?
It's not the one who puts down most money. It's the one, I have priority over the guy from Claremont because this is my next door property. It's not halakha. Halakha is this guy from Claremont. He made a better deal. I don't have to do business with my next door neighbor. Halakha says I own land. You as a neighbor must do a pshara. What is good? It is good and it is just. You're going to get paid for this. But also it is just to offer the adjacent land so he can build a bigger house. So he can have a bigger backyard. So he can have a field. So he can give it to his son. So whatever would happen here. That is a compromise. Chazal say this compromise brings out in this world you're able to get reimbursed for your land, and you're able to also do a chesed with the next door neighbor. So you're able to accomplish together what is good and what is just.
It's different.
Correct. This is very nice. It's a beautiful combination of two character traits which bring out something beautiful. And this is what all of this came to introduce you to one thing. And that is the following teaching from Chazal. I don't know for the life of me how people don't spend their whole life learning the words of Chazal. Their whole Torah comes from a place of gorgeous beauty. I can't tell you other than that. David HaMelech says, nobody in the world can be both just and good at the same time. But it says, Tov v'yashar Adonai, al ken yorech hatayim b'derech. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just and He's good. Our rabbis in Al-Kut Shimoni tell us, Lama tov shu yashar, ulama yashar shu tov. How is Hashem both just and good? The craziest teaching we have. The reason why Hashem is both good and just is not because He gave us the Torah. It's not because He took us out of Egypt. It's not because He brought us to the land of Israel. It's not because of anything aside from this one halakha. Shenatan laratzchanim arei miklat. Because He created a system where someone who murdered somebody else has a place where they can run to and not get killed. The cities of refuge. This is why Hashem is both good and just. You read this halakha, it's like that's it. This is what made Hashem good and just.
But it gave the criteria that the person was an accidental death. If the person was a blood murderer, there's no way he can go to that place.
Correct. There are actually three kinds of murders. The Torah mentions one. Chazal have three kinds of people. One who killed a person accidentally. One who killed a person, it was a freak accident. Like the one who the axe flew away. It wasn't an accidental death. It didn't even mean to hurt somebody else. And one is a situation where he did something, he built something, he killed somebody. He could have taken safety precautions and he didn't. This is almost like murdering somebody. These three people all have different halachot. I would love. Rabbi David Halevy has an entire book on the laws of the Sanhedrin, which I've been learning the last few years. It's blowing my mind the things that he learned inside of these books. But I would love one day to give a whole class on this topic. With the three different kinds of murders, why does each one have a different consequence? But suffice it, correct. The one who murders somebody is put to death according to halakha. If he has two witnesses, if he has a number of scenarios that must happen. But the person who killed by accident, and in American law, we have premeditated murder, murder that was a crime of passion, all kinds of different. At the end of the day, though, they may have slightly different lengths or durations of time they serve in prison. But prison is the answer for all of these people. And Rav Chaim David Halevy has a beautiful sentence that I must read to you. And his words are as follows. Hakav hamerkazi b'mishpatei haTorah hu. The main line that you can draw between all of the laws of the Torah, hi hacherut ha'ishit shel kol ezrach b'Yisrael. It is the personal freedom of every citizen of the Jewish people.
Yes.
V'lachen, and therefore, en onesh ma'asar b'mishpateha. You will not find in the entire Torah, from cover to cover, the penalty of prison. You may find it in rabbinic literature. You will find it in the Rambam in Hilchot Sanhedrin as a last resort that Chachamim do. But Rambam mentions that it goes against halakha to put somebody in prison, but that sometimes we can put people in prison if we believe that it will shape up the whole society in very select circumstances.
Yet last week in the Parashat, we saw quite a bit of stoning for offenses.
But very good. This is a good point, and I'm going to tell this.
Not the prison, but it's definitely something to death.
So I will get to this very soon.
Well, it's better.
Kol
It's better than feeding a criminal.
Kol choteh u'posheh. Every choteh, every sinner, and every criminal, ne'enash be'onesh hara'ui lo. Every person has a punishment that is fitting for him. Mibli liklo et rucho v'cheruto. Without imprisoning, not his body, he does it right. Without imprisoning his spirit and his freedom. והעונש הבולט ביותר בתורה כמצטיין מבחינה זאת הוא הרי מקלט לרוצח בשוגג. The mitzvah that shines the most in this regard is the one who killed accidentally, being able to flee to a city of refuge. הראוי אומנם לעונש על שגגתו, כיוון שהאדם מטבעו Moed Ha'olam, because a person in his nature belongs to the world, and he must be punished. He can't just do whatever he wants and get away with it. אלא שעונש מאסר ושלילת חירותו, but the option of imprisoning him and taking away his freedom, לא זו בלבד שאינו מועיל, אלא גם מזיק. Not only does it not help him, it also hurts him. והדברים ידועים כמה נזק מביא הכלא לכלואים בו, and it is already known how much damage comes to people who spend time inside a prison. Their friends all are criminals. They leave for 20 years society, and they come out of society, and they don't know anybody anymore. They don't have friends anymore. They don't have connections anymore. They can't get a job anymore. And what you do, says Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, you send him right back to prison. Because when he doesn't have a way to make a parnasah, he's going to go back and do the same things he did the first time that got him there.
That's exactly what happens.
That's exactly what happens. You should know the percentage of repeat offenders in this country's prison system is absurd. It's an absurd number of people. ולכן קבעה תורה את עונש הגלות. Our rabbis therefore Torah decided to give the punishment of exile. What is exile? תוך כדי שמירה על חירותו המלאה בתוך עיר מקלטו. You have complete freedom inside of your עיר המקלט. There are schools for your children to go to. You can go with your wife. This whole idea of conjugal visits and seeing children through glass barriers. Forget the father. Maybe the father did something wrong. But why does the child, his whole life, have to suffer that he never had a father who held him? He never had a place where he could just go and have a parent. He has a mother who's in prison, a father who's in prison. If there was an Ir Miklat, you'd have criminals. Yeah, sure, I don't want to move to the Ir Miklat, don't get me wrong. But you have a city of people who are living a normal, constructive lifestyle. They made a mistake. They did something wrong. They cannot be in normal society. But I cannot cut this person off from life. הנה כי כן זה טוב וגם ישר כאחד. So Chaim David Halevi, this is both tov and it's yashar. This person has their punishment. Their punishment is for the rest of their life. They're stuck in a place, a city of refuge. They can't leave. They can't move to Florida. They can't get up and go on a vacation. But they're able to maintain a healthy living lifestyle.
Yeah, but somebody still has to run the place.
Very good. Who runs the place?
The Levim.
The Leviim. Why the Leviim? All the cities of refuge are on my territory and Zev's territory. Why?
Yes, Zev's gonna run the place.
Edith is going to move to Florida.
That's your job.
As long as they have a Whole Foods.
What is the job of a Levi? Very good. Well, the job of a Levi in the Jewish tradition is to teach.
Guardians.
To teach. They're the teachers of
Yeah,
Torah.
but it's not by teaching them that you're gonna keep them there. You have to have.
Oh, there are gates and there are walls.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are guards, the police system.
Yeah.
What about
But-
until the
And
Kohen
guardians
Gadol
as well,
dies?
right?
So why this is the exception to the rule? It has a similarity to Yovel. There's the whole book about this topic, and I would love to teach all of it. But in this, and there is truth to this. Why? So why do certain things just go back? It's like resetting the world. Some things can't always be forever. Some punishments can't always be forever. But in this system, you have Leviim. The Leviim are the influence. A person is here. They realize how now they're stuck here. They realize how grave it is to take another person's life. They realize the kind of they don't want to be in this mess, but they have a chance to rehabilitate themselves. There's a situation in the Torah where a person steals money from somebody else. He steals money. He's not able to pay it back. He has to pay it back. What happens? Double. It's to pay more. What happens if he can't pay back the $30,000 he owes them?
Becomes a slave.
He becomes a slave. An Eved Ivri.
Yeah.
How long is he a slave for?
Till it pays back the 30,000.
Until he pays back his money.
Or
And
the
then he
sheep
becomes
eater.
Free.
No,
Free.
but that's
No.
if he wants to.
free. He becomes free.
If he wants to.
Why does he go? You can imagine somebody stole from you, and you're gonna hire them. I don't want this guy in my office. I don't want this guy sleeping in my house. He stole from me. He broke into my house in the middle of the night. I want this guy around my kids. Similar. I don't want to talk about this halakha now, but similar to the idea of a woman marrying the person who raped her. Of all the people in the world, you thought of a good shidduch, it's that guy. That's who I want my daughter to live with. This is a brilliant halakha, but I don't have time today to talk about it.
We often wonder about
It's a one we struggle with, but if you dig into the roots of it, there's brilliance to it. It may not apply in every generation, but in the generation of the Chachamim, this was a mitzvah that was very important. When you have here a person who's able to go work back for something, let's say a person stole from somebody else, and they spend 10 years in prison. Did the person get his money back?
No.
Did this person ever fix up what he did wrong?
No.
He now comes out of prison. Does the guy who put him in prison, is he happy now that he served 10 years of prison? Does he feel like justice was served? No, he's still missing his $30,000. Nothing was fixed aside from punishing a person. And in the words of David Halevi, you have caged his soul. You have caged his freedom. You have made him friends with criminals. and sent him back into society 10 years later as a worse person than he was before. The beauty of the Torah is that this person now sees what it's like to work for his share. You can't steal from somebody else. Every dollar that I make goes towards my freedom as a human being. While he's living in this person's house, it could be a house next door, but it must be, he must sleep in the same bed as his owner, meaning the same living conditions, the same food they have to eat. You can't have fancy food over here, and in the army they have like officers have certain food, and the normal soldiers have. It doesn't work this way with an Eved Ivri. So much so that our rabbis tell us, someone shekana Eved Ivri latzmo, kana adon latzmo. If somebody acquired for himself a slave, he also acquired for himself a master. It's a lot of work. On top of this, what if the guy who stole from you had 13 kids and a wife? Who has to feed these 13 kids and the wife?
You.
Does the slave have to work also for his wife and kids? No.
No.
You must put them up in housing. You must send them to school. You must pay their food. They must have dinner with you at your table.
Responsible for the
You're
thief?
responsible for the whole family of the thief.
Reminds
And
me-
in that situation where a person has reached this point where I am rehabilitating the guy who hurt me under the care of Bedin, it sounds extreme. But Torah tells us there's no other choice. If you're not going to, who's going to rehabilitate this person? Who's going to do it? And what? It's not a surprise, says Rabbi David Halevy, that after the years that he serves, what does he say? Ahavti et Adoni. I love my owner. I don't want to go. He says that's not a bad thing that he says that. It's a bad thing that he doesn't want to be a slave to Hashem. The beauty, though, is that we have a society in which a person who was harmed is able to create for his not a victim, his perpetrator, the one who did a crime against him, he's able to create an environment where the criminal says, I wish I could stay here. I finally understood what it means to earn my keep. I finally understood what it means to have a normal functioning family where I don't steal from other people. So if this is not the brilliance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then what is? Then what is?
reminds
a
me
person
of the
steals
discussion-
something. There's somebody now serving a life sentence for stealing socks. Socks. He was caught. He was a minor. It was the crazy law system that we have
There
here.
was somebody who was given 2 life terms for selling LSD at a Grateful Dead show. They just commuted his sentence.
How many years did he serve?
10.
10.
But this was like 2 lifetime sentence for.
Oh, it's unbelievable. According to the Torah, we would not have such a situation. Prison is not, it is an option. If you have a king and a government that feel that there are short-term prison sentences that could do some good for them, maybe.
We've
But it
created a
cannot-
professional criminal class.
And it's not, and none of those people come out. The refined, educated individuals that come out from after.
Sometimes.
Maybe
Exception.
sometimes. There are exceptions.
Well, if you get groups
Most of
within the
them are.
prisons that meditate or put on tefillin or different types of things. But remember we were talking 2 years ago about that sheriff in Arizona who was taking a quote unquote illegal immigrant, Apayo. Yeah, and he made him wear pink underwear.
Oh, yeah,
and,
sure.
And do slave labor and
I remember
bread and
this very
water
well.
and all that.
We have here an entire system where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm giving humanity the option to do Tov and Yashar together. Rav Chaim David Halevy says something interesting. He says that in our world, perhaps this slave being sold, it's not the current terms that we would use today. You'd probably not use the word slave, you'd use a personal assistant, whatever word you like. He said, what is really the difference between a slave and somebody who's employed? He says there's no difference. He lives in his own house, his kids go to school, he's not the way, wearing a collar chained to the wall, not a slave. Rather, what is happening here? It's a person he has a job, he has a profession, he's making money, his family is being supported. He says the only difference is that a person who's employed has the choice to move somewhere else. He can change jobs. This one can't change jobs until his sentence is over. But a person who works for somebody else, you're also an indentured servant. You also have the boss tells you to show up, the boss calls you for a meeting, the boss gives you trouble, the boss doesn't let you take vacation. It's no different than a normal employment. But this can only operate in a world, in a country, where Am Yisrael is in control, where Am Yisrael is running according to the laws of the Torah. If you're living in a world where people are so corrupt and immoral, and they would never be able to create this environment which fosters this rehabilitation for a criminal. And therefore, it's a sad thing that it doesn't happen. But Rav Chaim David Halevy suggests that there's options. He doesn't want to write them down in writing. He said maybe instead of criminals moving into the people's houses, he said you should have some kind of a factory where people are working. They don't sleep. They're not locked in a cage. The people have to show up every day for a job. They have to make back money. The part of their earning that they make, they pay back the person who they did
What about
they
the one
hurt.
that kill? I mean, there's
So killing, there's either a death penalty because this person cannot be rehabilitated according to the Torah, or there must be a place, a society, an Ir Miklat, where a person can go to. You cannot have a place where you take a human being, you lock him in a cage like he's an animal. He has a wife, he has children, He doesn't have a wife. That means he can never get married. That you cannot do this to another human being. It's not, we do not have the right as a people of a Torah to do this to another human being. It doesn't mean letting
It's
the
amazing, but we have a right to kill.
we have the right to kill him according to the laws of the Torah, or we have the right to put him in a place where he cannot harm other people. But we do not have the right to disturb his entire order of his life. We
So you're
don't.
saying then that, say, for Charles Manson,
I
capital
don't know who Charles
punishment.
Manson was.
You don't know
You
Charles
don't know?
Manson?
A serial killer was.
Serial killer in Los
Okay.
Angeles in the 60s. He's serving a life sentence. He should
can't
have the
be
death
that a
penalty
person
rather
who's a
than
serial-
be imprisoned the rest
Can't
of
be a
his life.
person that's a serial killer is still alive. I mean, either he should be put to death, or you should find a place where he can be constructed to
There's
society.
lots of serial killers in jail.
The death penalty in this country, sometimes people are living for 20 years before they're put to death. This is also not a normal situation. You should know that the psychologists who have studied death row inmates, the craziness that goes on in their head, that every day they don't know if it's going to be next year, if the appeal is going to be granted. What this does to another human being, says Rabbi Chaim David, we have an obligation to create a system of law and order. We are not allowed in the process to abuse people along the way.
Yeah, but there are also people that have been in jail for years and they're innocent.
This
There's
also happened. And what do they get?
stories.
Remember that they just commuted somebody his sentence because they found the DNA was completely wrong against him.
Right.
He was a black man. Was in a time where racism was rampant in
There's
this
been
country,
many cases
and
like
and
that.
he got on his way out of the prison. I'm sorry. 40 years of his life he took. 40 years of his life. He's not married. He doesn't have children.
Yeah,
he
but
can never
if
get a
you
job.
have killed that guy, it's even worse.
It could have been worse, which is why according to the Torah, tell me according to the Torah, according to the Torah, most people you can't kill. Because you have to have two witnesses that were seeing them do the act. If a guy goes behind a wall and two people see him go behind the wall, and they see another guy go behind the wall, and they see one of them run away with a bloody knife, and they look behind the wall and there's a guy lying on the floor in a pile of blood, you can't kill this guy. You didn't see him commit the crime. The death penalty is used very rarely. So what do you do with such a murder? For such murderers, you have either Ir Miklat. The Rambam does mention that some of these murderers you could imprison, but the Rambam considers murder to be a very unique crime. What about drug possession? What about shoplifting? What about tax fraud? All of these people are going to be in prison. The guy who was a father of children, mother of children, she was stealing from her taxes. So because of this, she's going to serve 15 years in the prison.
See,
It makes sense to somebody.
Here you're talking about, I assume, a post-Messianic society where Jewish law becomes kind of universalized, because right now Jewish law doesn't apply to the non-Jews.
Correct, but I
It
believe,
doesn't even apply in Israel.
Right.
correct. But you should believe. You
I
should
mean, I
believe.
believe inside.
You
like
should believe that if this
you know the
system,
clarity
if this
of this
system
is very
who's now
important.
been codified into books, I have a few books already. I always tell the people who want a religious state of Israel, I said this on Shavuot, they're ignoramuses. How they've never thought about what the religious state of Israel will look like. You have to write the book for me. A book which says we're a minority of religious people in a majority of a secular nation. How do you expect that we shall impose our laws on everybody else while not looking like ISIS? Somebody has to write that book. Rabbi Chaim David Halevy wrote a book. The Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg wrote a book. Aside from those two books, I don't know anybody else who actually dealt with this question seriously. The serious question of, so what is public school going to look like? Are you going to force everyone to keep Shabbat, or are you going to cut off their heads? What's going to happen now in our public schools?
You'll have those modesty signs from Meir Shurim everywhere.
The question, can we responsibly create a society that follows the laws of the Torah? And what Rav Chaim David Halevy showed us in Shavuot was that even in the times of Tanakh, we didn't have societies that followed Torah because the people were not willing to accept the laws of the Torah. And therefore David HaMelech had to create a civil law system that went against the Torah in order to let society follow a set of laws that they chose.
What do you mean against the Torah?
We did not, in the days of the Tanakh, most of our kings who were righteous did not only judge the people according to the laws of the Torah. The people were not willing to accept such a rule on them. It blows your mind when you look back in the Tanakh and you see,
Why don't you find other rabbis who know these things?
These are books. They're simple
I know,
books of the
but-
Tanakh. There's
Yeah,
none
I
of,
don't hear it anywhere else.
unfortunately, because what I'm telling you is that most people who talk about how a religious country should look, they've never taken the 10 minutes to just sit down and say, let me think about what it will look like.
It's
How
a
do I-
society in
how
the
would I do
sky is
such a
what it
thing?
is. It's like a utopia.
It's a utopia that practically didn't exist and will not exist unless we take the steps. That is why we're hoping for a Goel, we're hoping for a Redeemer that can turn the whole world onto Hashem so we can have such a society. But until then, you must be practical. Until then, you must know which elements of the Torah everybody will accept upon themselves. And I believe that this attitude towards prisons and the lack of rehabilitation that goes on in a prison, it's not something that only Jews would appreciate. I believe that if there was a president in this country who would stand up and open up this book and give shiur on the Rambam, the laws of prison, I believe that you have tens of thousands of people running after this
So
person.
what would happen to someone like the former president Moshe Katsav and his sexual convictions that he had?
Okay, so a man like this, you have to again look at the
He just
Torah.
said he lost his appeal and he's back
What would
in
the
jail.
Torah prescribe to a sexual predator? The first and foremost thing you have to know, there must be a process here that rehabilitates a person. Baruch Hashem, in today's world, we've evolved in the realm of psychology, of mental health, to a place where there are people who can sit, it may take years and years and years for a person to take the steps and to take the precautions and to be secluded from certain parts of society in which they're able to rehabilitate themselves to a healthy
Yeah,
lifestyle.
but then you're back to this being secluded means again police.
What does secluded
and-
mean? It means why you have such a thing like a restraining order. This man is never allowed to be next to a woman again. You just
Yeah,
can't.
but somebody has to make sure that happens, and they need the cars.
So how do we-
police.
You can have a track today. It's very easy. You have a tracking system on a person, and you can. It's not so. Today it's much easier than it used to be. And this is not up to me to sit down and decide the laws.
Ankle bracelet.
But these are laws that are able. There is a way to not lock a person in a cage,
Yeah.
and to still give them a punishment that they have been punished. Imagine the person who got hurt also. We never deal the criminal, the victim. So the criminal gets put in prison. What does the country do? Any country. What do we do to the victim? The rape victim. What do we do for
Yeah,
them?
like some of those girls that they rape and then they kill the girl.
That
was her crime.
What do we do? What do we do for these
you're
girls?
talking about-
Forget Saudi Arabia. I'm here talking about America. The girl who gets raped and her rapist gets put in prison. What does this country take upon themselves to do for that girl?
Very little psychological help was given. Even.
Any psychological help?
If any.
Do we take upon ourselves to make sure that she goes back to a healthy lifestyle? Do we make sure to be there by her chuppah? Do we make sure are we there for her? No, we just punish the. It's all about punishing people. It's not about rehabilitating even the victims. And the Torah is telling you this is not the way of life that a healthy society would follow. And I believe that if this Torah was taught to the world would say, "V'asita hayashar v'atov b'nei Adonai Elecha." Only the eyes of Hashem can decide what is good and what is just. And if humanity would see it, I believe that it's this Torah, not Shabbat, not Tzitzit, not Tefillin. It's not going to bring the non-Jews right into Judaism if you tell them about the leather boxes we're going to tie on their head. What will bring the non-Jews right into Judaism is when you tell them, I have a solution, I have an answer to all these ills of society that we're studying with. That all the things we're struggling with, we have an answer. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a way that's different than the prison system. He gave us a way that is different than the legal system that we have, than the tax system that we have. We have a different way. And this different way could change the entire universe. And B'ezrat Hashem, I hope to live along with you to see that day happen very soon. Not by any miracles, but by us doing the hard work that it takes to teach the world there is another option than this craziness that you've developed in the last 5,776 years of human history. Everyone should have a beautiful evening.